Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing another episode of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to some of the wonderful animals that we share in this world around us. And today we've got quite a cool assortment. We've got some remasters, but some very cool ones, some very interesting new species, which I'm really excited to talk about. So yeah, we're going to get stuck into this one. So we're going to be starting off with some birds. Today we've got two storks. We have got the white stork to start us off with, by Thomas and Ginger Toast. Did a wonderful job actually with these guys. Very, very big fan. And the white stork, they are a very large bird in the stork family, as you can kind of gather. And they get their name because of their mostly white plumage, besides these black wing feathers and all that. And they're quite big. They can generally get to about 100 to 115 centimeters, or 39 to 49 inches in long. And their standing height's about 100 to 125 centimeters, or 39 to 49 inches. And they have a wingspan of 155 to 215 centimeters, or 61 to 85 inches. And they weigh about 2.3 to 4.5 kilograms, about 5 to 9 pounds. So pretty big animals, as you can see, especially for birds. Their wing coverts, as you can see, are black, and some other feathers, but for the most part, these guys are mostly white. And they have this big red bill and legs, which is really cool. And as they're babies, as you can see here, they've got this like fluffy down that's grey, then they evolve into their adult colours, or grow up into their adult colours. So in terms of their habitat, the dominant subspecies of these guys lives across Europe. They usually breed in Europe and parts of North Africa and also Asia. And the dominant subspecies will go for all this area and then come down to sub-Saharan Africa for... they'll come down there for the winter, so they eat in Africa, and then once the weather gets cooler, they go up to the north to breed. And but there's this other population that breeds in, I think, Kazakhstan or somewhere like that, and then it comes down to Iran and Western India to breed, which is really cool. That population is about 1,500 birds, but the other ones are quite a bit more common, so that's good. They typically prefer to breed in like grassy meadows, farmlands, and shallow wetlands, especially in places like Chernobyl. The population actually declined there, and because of the farmland with the tall shrubs growing, because the areas around Chernobyl weren't being well monitored, because it's obviously quite irradiated. But they actually declined in the area, not because of that, but because of the tall grasses. And these guys can be bred in greater numbers in areas with open grassland or grassy areas. And it seems like they actually benefited from human activity during the Middle Ages, and especially in the wintering grounds in Africa as well. And they make use of those grasslands. So in the Middle Ages, when a lot of forest was cleared, especially with the extinction of these large mega herbivores that would help clear the forest, but they kind of just cut them all down, and that really allowed their population to grow. But that was until kind of the most recent 19th, 20th century, where they kind of just reached a point where it was just basically got rid of them, especially industrialization and agriculture that really hurt their populations, also climate change. But there's some actually improvements on that. There's believed to be about 5,000 pairs in Sweden. There's also the pair bred in the United Kingdom for the first time in over 600 years, which is part of the reintroduction project of the white stork. And as I mentioned, these guys migrate. Typically from their breeding area in Europe and then down to sub-Saharan Africa through a bunch of different routes. And in terms of behavior, they're gregarious, so they live in big flocks that have been, non-breeding groups have gathered 4 to 50 birds in the breeding season, and the breeding birds may actually hunt in small groups together, or some colonial nesting is possible. And they actually, they will preen each other and stuff to keep themselves, like friendship going, which is really cool. And in terms of communication, they, like other storks, they kind of use bill chattering to keep, it almost sounds like gunfire, like a machine gun fire. They usually rattle their beaks. They'll also use other like throat pouches. They allow them to display calls, and they're also quite territorial over the summer when they're breeding. And in terms of lifespan, because they breed in these open wishlands and stuff like that, they create a large nest, or even on man-made platforms, they'll make these large nests, with each nest being between 1 to 2 meters wide and 0 to 1.5 meters in diameter, and about 60 to 250 kilograms in weight. So they make quite big nests, and they will nest in loose colonies, and they were now. It was often seen that these guys were kind of a good omen, that like, oh, summer is coming, so that's really cool. And even other birds will actually nest within the large nest of these storks, such as starlings, sparrows, not eels, owls, a lot of those kind of birds. And they typically lay about a single brood per year with about 4 eggs. The clutches have between 1 and 7 have been recorded, as we see these little guys here. And the eggs are white, but they often look dirty because of the glutinous covering, with the eggs being between 73 millimeters to 52 millimeters, or about 2.9 to 2 inches in length and diameter. And they weigh about 96 to 126 grams. And the incubation will happen soon after this first egg is laid, and the hatching is about a month, 30 to 34 days. And the first hatchling typically has a competitive edge, as it was basically the one that gets the most resources. But obviously that can change a lot, and this behavior often occurs with food shortages, so the first one kind of gets most of the food. And the temperature and weather is also very important, and these guys, when they hatch, they can grow rapidly in the first few weeks, and they reach a plateau of about 3.4 kilograms or 7.5 pounds in 45 days, with the length of their beak also increasing as well, which is also very, very cool. And in terms of their diet, they feed a wide variety of animal prey. They'll feed on pretty much anything, such as insects, grasshoppers, frogs. They particularly like frogs, small reptiles, also bird eggs, also young birds, mollusks, small mammals, like voles and shrews. So they pretty much eat anything they can get their mouths around. And the diet of non-breeding birds is pretty much the same, but they often take food from more dry areas. And they've actually been known to steal food from other birds, like Montagu's harrier. They've been known to steal kills off that, which is really interesting. In terms of conservation, as we mentioned, their populations kind of declined because of industrialization and changes in agriculture at the beginning of the 19th century, with the last wild individual album in Belgium seen in 1895, in Sweden in 1955 and 1950, in the Netherlands in 1991. But they have been introduced to a lot of these regions, which is good. And a lot of that was also due to DDT, which hurt the shells. That makes their shells thin, so there were less babies being born. But luckily, there have been some in populations. There's like lots in Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus. But there's some also being introduced in new areas, such as reintroduced into areas such as like Bulgaria, Germany, places like that. But they're generally doing pretty well. But obviously, there had been some issues. But so luckily now they're at least concerned. It's actually a very good conservation story, and I'm a big fan of that. So yeah, that's enough about our wonderful stalk here. That was done by Ginger Toast and Thomas. Both did a wonderful job on these guys. And next we've got another cool stalk going on here. We have got the greater adjutant, I believe I'm not sure how you say that, but the greater adjutant. I think that's probably the best one to say it. Look at this really wonderful guy. Let's find one that's not standing. There we are. Look at this wonderful guy. So, these guys are another member of the stork family, and their genus includes the lesser adjutant from Asia and the marabou stork, which we've covered before. These guys are actually very, very huge birds. They stand at about 145 to 150 centimeters tall, or 4'9" to 4'11", and their average length is about 136 centimeters, 4'6", and on average have a 250 centimeter wingspan, or about 8 feet 2 inches. And of course, you do that for me. Let's have a look at you over here since you're walking around. They rival its cousin, the marabou stork, is the largest wing stork. And while there's been no weights, it's assumed that these guys are kind of among the largest living storks, with them overlapping around the saddlebill stork and the marabou stork. With juveniles known in captivity weigh between 8 and 11 kilograms, or 18 to 24 pounds. And the biggest ones are as they weigh between like 4 kilograms as nestling and up to 8 kilograms once reaching maturity. But yes, they seem to be quite big in that area, and you can see some of the very distinct looks this guy has. They've got a very large wattle with this like uh, orangish skin around their head that's bare, and it's a really large beak with like this ring of white feathers, and then their black and white feathers going down their body, and this grey feet. So these guys are typically found in northern India, well, once widespread. However, these guys, the colonies there have declined. But they're typically found around non-breeding areas that we can find in India. The breeding range is kind of like Bhutan or like the western, eastern parts, the northeastern parts of India. And then their resident non-breeding range is typically around Southeast Asia, which is pretty cool. And they typically like these kind of habitats. And these guys are usually seen in small groups or by themselves around shallow lakes or even garbage dumps. And they're often followed by kites and vultures, which will sometimes sit and follow them for a while. And they may actually hold their wings outstretched to control their temperatures as well, which is really cool. So these guys, like other large birds, they will winter in colonies, and you can see the cute little baby here. They make a nest that's a large platform of twigs and stuff near the end of on a tall tree or something. And the beginning of the breeding season was marked by several birds trying to occupy the tree, and then they'll chatter and try and scare each other off and all that. And these guys will typically lay between 3 and 4 white eggs with intervals of 1 to 2 days, and the incubation begins after the first egg is laid, with both parents incubating. And they each take about 35 days to hatch, typically. And adults may actually spread their wings to shade the chicks sometimes when they're on that platform. And up to about 5 weeks, the juveniles can like leap pretty well and defend themselves. And by that time, they start to be able to leave the nest and fly at about 4 months old. But they may still continue to be fed by their parents. So yeah, really, really cool. These guys also are omnivores. But they're mainly a scavenger, so they'll feed on frogs, large insects, birds, reptiles, and rodents, and other thing as well. They've actually been known to attack wild ducks and swallow them whole as well, so that's very, very cool. And they actually capture lots of fish as well. They can weigh up to like 2 to 3 kilograms or 4 to 6 pounds. And even they've been known to eat a lot of carrion, so they have this like vulture-like bare head, as you can see here, which is an adaptation for that. And they've even been found in garbage dumps and will feed on human and animal poop. And they'll actually been known to feed on human corpses along the Ganges River, so that's pretty interesting. But in terms of conservation, there's been lots of issues with these guys in terms of loss of nesting and feeding habitat because of the draining of wetlands, pollution, and also collecting for human hunting and eggs as well. The world population at the moment is listed as less than 1,000 individuals in 2008. So they're listed as endangered by the IUCN, but there have been conservation measures to try and help them, such as breeding them in captivity, and things like nearly 15% of the chicks that were killed when they fall out of the nest and die of starvation. So some conservationists have used nest positioned below the nest. They use nets. So that means if the young fall down, they just get caught in the net, and then they're fine. And then they're often fed or raised in enclosures and then released to join their wild siblings. So it's a really interesting conservation story for them. But they seem to be doing well. They're still endangered, but they're doing much better than they were, hopefully. But yeah, really, really nice. I'm a really big fan of this design. I just love that wattle. I'm a big fan of how this guy came out. Nice to see more birds. So now we're going to move on from birds, and now we're going to have a look at some reptiles. We've got one reptile today, but that's okay. So we have got here the Brazilian giant tortoise, also known as the yellow-footed tortoise. So we've got the cool yellowfoot here. So these guys are a close relative of the redfoots, which I think we covered a while ago, and we will cover again because they've been updated. But these guys are quite large. They have an average length of about 40 centimeters or 15 inches, and the largest known specimen is about 94 centimeters or 37 inches. And they're actually the 6th largest tortoise species in the world, after the Galapagos tortoise, the African spurred, the Aldabra tortoise, the Sulcata tortoise, and then the leopard and Asian forest tortoise. So these guys are quite big. So these guys get their name because of the yellow foot or the yellow-footed tortoise, because they got these yellow feature scales on their feet that are yellow, and they're also just generally yellow. And as I mentioned, they're quite large, but typical length's about 40 centimeters, but the largest known specimen was a female. They got about 94 centimeters long. With this long carapace, it's also highly, with a high dome, and it's also got a lot of these white spots on them, which is really, really interesting. And the head is also quite narrow. It's longer than it is wide, so it's kind of like a narrowish one. And they have an upper jaw with three tooth-like points that help them to eat plants and things, which is really interesting. And it seems like these guys have some sexual dimorphism, and they're slightly larger than the males. Is typically slightly larger than the females, but the larger specimens tend to be females. And this is believed to be potentially because they also have distinct changes in the plastron. Like the female will have a short tail that's conical, and the male has a longer tail, which is generally tucked to one side. And also, the males will sometimes, I believe, have shell plastrons, or the bottom part of the shell that kind of curves inward, so they can get onto the female. And these guys, their typical habitat, sometimes they prefer dry forest, but sometimes rainforest they kind of like. They like humid areas, things like that. It's actually a little bit of debate. And these guys, in terms of their behavior, they'll also identify each other using body language. Male tortoises will also swing their heads back and forth as a mating ritual. And mating will occur year-round for these guys, and there's no parental care, and the baby tortoises, as you can see here, will have to fend for themselves. So look at these little guys. So in terms of their diet, they'll eat many different types of foliage, so they pretty much eat just whatever they can get their mouths around. So lots of grasses, fallen fruits, even carrion sometimes, plants, bones, mushrooms, and even slow-moving invertebrates such as worms and snails. And in captivity, they'll often be fed collard greens, dandelions, carrots, cuttlebone, tortoise chow that you can get, a lot of those things. And they will reach maturity in the wild to about 8 to 10 years. And the fecundity of the female generally depends on her size. So the bigger she is, the more eggs she can produce. And on average, a female will produce 6 to 16 eggs per year, although some individuals may not even breed each year. Their eggs are quite brittle, and they get about 3 to 6 centimeters in diameter. And they will increase in size. The egg size will increase with the tortoise. And the young are pretty much self-sufficient from birth, and they can live up to 50 to 60 years, so they're quite long-lived. So let's talk a little bit about their breeding. Sulcata tortoises, not sulcata, yellowfoot, they are synchronized their breeding on the onset of the raining season from July to September, with a general increase in activity noted, and the males will do their head bobbing and jerking and try and get the female's attention, and then they'll mate, and then they'll make the cooing sounds and all that. And the males will sometimes also fight each other as well for females. And I think that's really, really cool. And species with male combat actually is believed to evolve larger male size, because in these land species, the males are typically more likely to fight for the female, while in sea turtles, aquatic species, the females are usually larger because they've got to obviously carry more eggs and things like that. And I think that's really, really cool. And these guys are considered endangered species because the major populations are also protected as well. They're often seen in the pet trade, but they also can be seen as food on the food market, so over-harvesting of them can really hurt their populations. But yeah, that's really, really awesome. And I think I've got to make sure to credit everyone. The Greater Anjat was done by Monsoon. We all love Monsoon, really old Zootopia modder. And this wonderful yellow-footed tortoise was done by Leaf. And he's also done the next mod, which we'll talk about, is the European Rabbit. So I'm really excited to have a look at these guys. So here is the European Rabbit. Look at these cute little guys. So this is the European Rabbit. They're a species of rabbit that is native to the Iberian Peninsula and western France and the northern Atlas Mountains in northwest Africa. And they've been widely introduced to many other places across the world, and that they often have devastating effects to their biodiversity. But however, the decline in their native range has been mainly because of stuff like rabbit calcivirus and Myxomaxus, which has been introduced. Also lots of overhunting as well. which has hurt species that are highly dependent on them, such as the Iberian lynx and the Spanish imperial eagle. And they're known as invasive species pretty much everywhere except Antarctica and their native range, especially in Australia and New Zealand, where they've had pretty devastating impacts. So, these guys, in terms, they're smaller than the European hare and the mountain hare, and they typically get between 40 centimeters in length, or about 16 inches, and weigh between 1,200 to 2,000 grams, about 2 to 4 pounds, and their hind foot will measure 8 to 10 centimeters, or 3.3 to 3.9 inches, with these long ears as well. And size and weight will also vary a lot between the quality of food where it's living. Large specimens have been seen to get up to about 5 kilograms, or pure rabbits can get up to 5 kilograms. They're uncommon, but they have been reported, so it can be quite big. And typically their fur, as you can see, they're kind of greenish brown, but there's lots of variations, such as especially lighter colors as well. There's a lot of variation there. And they will mount once a year, and the beginning of March on the face, and it'll spread over the back. And the underfur is completely replaced in October, November, where they can exhibit these great variations in color, such as dark gray, or even completely black. They can be completely black, melanistic, which is pretty cool. And in terms of their socially and territorially behaviors, these guys will live in warrens from about 2 to 10 individuals when live in smaller groups to ensure breeding success, and they can be quite territorial to help ensure their population. And the size of the species home ranges varies a lot depending on the food and cover and things like that, though it's generally less than 0.7 hectares. And except during the time of low rabbit density and high quality food, males will tend to be larger than the females. And they typically don't really stray too far from their burrows. They typically no more than 500 meters, unless it's a rough change in environment. And they're quite gregarious, and they live in stable social groups and have dominance hierarchies. So the males will obviously be the top one. And among bucks, the status is determined through the access to does, with the dominant bucks siring many of the offspring in the colony. And the dominance does have a priority over the best breeding nesting sites as well. So the biggest and baddest gets the best sites. And the ones that are less high in the hierarchy will often be in more vulnerable parts of the warrens, so they'll be most likely to be eaten by foxes or badgers. And during the breeding season, the dominant bucks will have polygamy, so they'll have lots of breeding with lots of females, while the lower status individuals will have monogamous breeding relationships. And they'll usually have between January to August, they'll have between 3 and 7 kittens each. But in populated areas, they may actually lose all their embryos if it's overpopulated. And the gestation generally for these guys, we'll have a look at a baby while we're running around with these guys. Look at how cute this little guy is. The gestation period for these guys is typically about 30 days, with the sex ratio being 1-to-1 between male and female. And greater maternal investment over male offspring may result in higher birth weights for bucks. And kittens born to domestic buck and does who enjoy better nesting and breeding sites will tend to grow larger than those of subordinate rabbits, which is pretty interesting. And in terms of burrowing behavior, they actually often burrow between on mostly slopes and banks, where they can better drain water from their warrens. And their entrances are typically 10 to 50 centimeters in diameter and can be easily recognizable in bare earth. And they'll often try and have these big complex excavations where they can go down several feet, so they can have nice safe places that are away from other rabbits and predators that they can't get in. And they'll often huddle together as well, which is really cute, especially in the babies. And they often will communicate with screams and distress calls that sound like a piglet. And they also will thump to get attention, I think. Yeah, something like that. And in terms of their habitat, they typically like to live in short grasslands, their feeding areas, so that's kind of why agricultural places are perfect, because they're typically kept quite low, so that's perfect habitat for little bunny rabbits. They will typically like these kind of soils, also like they also like places that in the tree line as well, and that often really depends on where they are. Warrens typically tend to be larger, more interconnected in areas with chalk than in those in sand. And these guys will often, in large plantations, they often occur in the outer skirts of it and along fire breaks and the ridges and things like that. So in terms of their diet, they eat a wide array of herbage, so lots of different types of plants, such as grasses, succulents, um, winter wheats as well, and blackberries even eaten. And in captivity, they'll be fed on like things like blackberries as well, and fodder and acorns and things like that. But generally, lots of grass and things like that. And in terms of predators, they'll be eaten by things like foxes, dingoes, wolves, lynxes, wolverines, dogs, mustelids as well, ferrets, stoats, and weasels. They'll even eat them a lot. Even minks as well. So they're quite a common prey species and very important for the ecosystem. And we've obviously had a pretty bad relationship with them in terms of their wild habitats. So humans kind of introduced them to lots of places. Their native range is kind of the Atlas Mountains and Portugal and Spain, so that kind of area. But they've been kind of introduced everywhere. So pretty much they've been introduced to Great Britain, Hawaii, Southern Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and even Ukraine. The British Isles have been introduced to, and they're believed to be introduced there by the Normans in like 1066. So they've been there for a while. But in Australia, there was 24 specimens brought in 1859, and that just exploded their population. They even tried introducing things such as Myxomexis, which is a toxin or a virus that really spreads through these guys. Has provided some relief, but these guys have outcompeted a lot of native species such as bilbies and things like that. Also, the same issue in New Zealand. That's why they introduced stoats and ferrets into New Zealand to try and get rid of rabbits, but obviously that didn't work, and they ate all the native birds. So they've become a very, very big issue. But luckily, in their native range, they're considered, well, not luckily, but they're considered endangered in their native range because of populations getting hurt. They're considered near threatened at those areas because of diseases and recent declines and things like that. But if only they were only common where they're supposed to be, and extinct where they're not meant to be. So that's the really only big problem here. But yeah, I'm a big fan of how these guys came out. Leaf did a wonderful job. So now we're going to move on from the European rabbit. We got another Australian. These guys are in Australia, but they're not native Australian. We got an Australian species here. We have got the yellow-footed rock wallaby, which is really awesome. Also done by Leaf and Monsoon, so they kind of comboed it. These guys, also known as the ring-tailed rock wallaby, they're a macropod, which is the group that includes wallabies, tree kangaroos, wallaroos, and kangaroos, all that. And you can see these guys are quite characteristic because they have this like grey to fawn like back, and also these light-coloured below side and a stripe going down their side. Even a black one as well. And the forelimbs and highlimbs, as you can see, they're kind of bright yellow, especially in the males, and even light orange here. And they get quite big. The head to body length is about 48 to 650 millimeters, or about 60 millimeters, so about 2 feet. And then a tail that's between 570 and 700 millimeters, usually 690 millimeters. And then typically weigh up to 6 to 11 kilograms, so they are quite big. They are typically found in New South Wales, eastern South Australia, and isolated populations live in Queensland. And they're not typically found near humans, as their name implies. They typically like to live near rock outcroppings and things like that. So there's kind of two recognized subspecies. There's the one that's listed vulnerable, that lives in southern Australia, with a population estimated to be between 2 and 6,500. But luckily there's been some conservation efforts, the populations has increased. But in New South Wales, there are some areas where the population between 170 to 215 animals, where they face competition from a lot of introduced herbivores such as feral goats and rabbits, also predation from feral cats and foxes, and isolated populations, as well as habitat destruction through mineral extractions, things like that. So there's a lot of issues with these guys. And there's another species, subspecies listed in vulnerable that includes the same threats. This population is estimated to be between 5,000 and 10,000 individuals in 1993, but it could have increased or declined. We really don't know. But as you mentioned, these guys were often killed in large numbers for their pelts to live up with a cute little baby. And these guys were occasionally known and described from Australia, and they have been introduced, I believe, to Cowo Island in New Zealand, which is a bit dangerous. But luckily there have been some really good conservation work going into these guys, protecting areas where they live, and they're not so badly endangered. They're considered near threatened, so there's not an immediate risk of their extinction. But there is issues that they're facing, as I mentioned, like competition from predators, and other introduced herbivores like goats and things like that. But for the moment, they're doing quite well, and I think they're rather cool looking. I'm a big fan of how they came out, especially this nice oranges color that comes out on the male here. Whereas the female is obviously not as bright, but really did a wonderful job. I'm a big fan of how these guys came out. Leaf and Monsoon done a wonderful job. And next, we have got a really cool little guy that I'm really excited to talk about. This is by Genora Pizza and Mega Gaming Rex. We have got the Rock Hyrax. So look at these wonderful guys here. So these guys, also known as the Rock Rabbit or the Connie or the Dazzy or the Cape Hyrax, these guys are a small terrestrial mammal that is native to the Middle East and Africa, and they're commonly found in South Africa as well. They're one of the 5 living species of the order Hyrax, and the only one in its genus Procavia. And these guys typically weigh between 4 and 5 kilograms, and have these short ears and tails, as you can see here. So let's look at this wonderful little guy. So rock hyraxes, as you can see, they're quite squat and heavily built here. They reach a length of about 50 centimeters long and weigh about 4 kilograms, with slight sexual dimorphism, with the males being about 10% bigger. And hyraxes sizes is correlated to precipitation. So if they live in a place with more rain, they'll get bigger because it's just better food. And they also have dorsal glands, which excrete an odor that the males and females will use to communicate and also to mark territories. And you can see here they've also got a pointed head, a short neck, with big incisors, which is very reminiscent of elephants. And these guys are actually one of the closest living relatives of elephants because they live in a group of Afrotheria, and Afrotheria includes these little guys, dugongs, manatees, elephants, otter shrews, tenrecs. It's a very interesting group of pretty much exclusively African animals, with some, as I mentioned, like manatees and elephants moving out of there. But it's a very, very interesting group of animals, and I suggest you read up on that because Afrotheres are really, really cool. And another thing that makes them more similar to elephants is that they have plantigrade feet, and their hind feet are semi-digitigrade. And they have 5 little toes that is looks much more like very similar to elephants, actually, in a lot of ways. And they also have their testes inside their body, which is another feature they share with elephants and sirens. And thermoregulation in these guys has been a subject of much debate. And the animals will keep a constant environmental conditions during such variation. So that means they'll kind of try and keep water in their bodies as well as possible. And these guys, as I mentioned, they kind of live all across sub-Saharan Africa, except for the Congo Basin, Madagascar. And they also live in Algeria, the Middle East, Libya, places like that. And there's some variation in their pelts. There's been some subspecies, even subspecies potentially described. These guys are, I believe, terribly overlumped. There's potentially up to 10 species of hyrax that are within these species and subspecies that can be figured out. But yeah, these guys, they like to live in, typical of the name of rock hyraxes, they like to live in rock areas such as rocks and soils, and they live in colonies with an adult male, several adult females, and immature babies. And they will be active during the day and sometimes during moonlit nights. And the dominant male will defend and watch over his group and mark territories as well. And in terms of predators, they're preyed on by leopards, cobras, adders, rock pythons, caracals, hawks, wild dogs, owls, eagles, things like that. And they've actually been reportedly really preyed upon by terrestrial predators in Israel. And hyraxes have even been also absent from the droppings of wolves in the Judean desert. So some places, no one wants to eat them. So hyraxes feed on a wide variety of different plant species, such as even insects and grubs as well, so they're quite generalist in that regard. And they will forage for food up to about 50 meters from their refuge, and they usually feed on the ground with one or more hyraxes acting as sentries. And they're able to go many days without water due to the moisture they obtain from their food, but they will quickly dehydrate under direct sunlight. And they like things with citrus, things like that. And they actually make a loud grunting sound when they're chewing as they move their jaws, which is quite funny. And it actually lead to a misconception in the Bible that mentions that hyraxes will chew their cud, but that's technically not true because they're not ruminants, and ruminants will chew their cud, but these guys don't. So that's just a kind of cool little fact. That's a little bit of history. But in terms of social behavior, these guys kind of live in more egalitarian societies with social associations spread more evenly among the group, and these groups will survive longer. And they're actually the first non-human species within this balance as described. So basically, they're all good friends and try and keep up with each other, and there's not really a huge difference between males and females in terms of their ranking and no dominance hierarchies, things like that. They're often quite vocal as well. They have many different types of vocal that can provide information about their size, such as size, age, social status, condition, and their hormonal state. So they have quite complex social calls and things like that, and actually found to be quite similar to things like primates, cetaceans, and bats. So it's actually quite similar to that. So they're quite vocal and have all sorts of different calls, which is really, really cool. And in terms of dispersal, they have kind of 4 stages where they go through. There's territorial males, perennial males, so it's kind of like as they kind of be more solitary and they'll take over a group. And then they have early dispersers, which are young, that are leaving their birth site for the first time. And these late dispersals will kind of are also juvenile males, but they leave their site much later, about 30 or more months, when they're about 30 months old. And yeah, they're generally pretty common. They're considered least concern, but yeah, I'm really cool to talk about these rock hyraxes. These guys are little elephants, and I love to say that because they're such cool little animals. Really excited to talk about this guy. Again, that was done by Mega Gaming Rex and Genora Pizza. Did a wonderful job. And next, we've got a mod from Narwhal making a little return. So we've got the Bornean Bearded Pig over here. So really, really nice mod over here, as you can see. So the Bornean Bearded Pig, or Sus barbatus, or even just known as the Bearded Pig, they're in the pig genus Sus, and they can be recognized by their big beard, and these guys come from Borneo, is kind of their name. They are found in Southeast Asia, such as Sumatra, Borneo, the Malay Peninsula, and such, lots of little archipelagos and things. And they typically live in a family group and can reproduce from about 18 months of age, and they can crossbreed with other species in the family. So these guys are kind of known from 2 subspecies. There's the Barbatus, the dominant subspecies, also the western one. And as I mentioned, they're quickly found, pretty much found around all these areas. And there is another species, or subspecies, depending on who you ask, the Wawadin bearded pig, which is considered a subspecies, but sometimes under the phylogenetic species concept, it's considered a full species. It's really just kind of who you ask. It's taxonomy moments. And these guys are found in Palawan, which was an island in the Philippines, which I think is a really cool little fact. And these guys are found in places such as San Diego Zoo. Some other zoos have been breeding them as well. But yeah, really, really cool. They're not too different in terms of behavior and ecology from other pigs. So they're just another species in that regard. And look at these cute little babies. Very, very cute. But I think they're just so cool. I love the look of them. They're not very different in that regard in terms of ecology, stuff like that. They're quite similar to other pigs. Still really cool, though. Big fan. That one. It's done by Narwhal as well. Really cool to see some more variety going on. And yeah, last but most definitely not least, we've got another mod by Leaf. We have got the Bush Dog, which I'm so excited to talk about. I want to talk about these guys forever, and these came out so well. So these guys are a canine that's typically found in Central and South America, and they're actually were found by Peter Wilhelm Lude from fossils in Brazilian caves, and it was believed to be extinct until they actually found live ones, which is really, really cool. And believe it or not, their closest living relative is actually the maned wolf, which is like the complete opposite in terms of looks of these guys, because these guys are small and they've got short legs, and the maned wolf is really tall and big and lanky. It's really cool. I think that's just such an interesting juxtaposition. And these guys, you can see they've got like brownish fur or tan fur, even like reddish tone. But younger individuals, as we can have a look here, often have brownish fur on their bodies. Adults will typically have a head to body length of about 57 to 75 centimeters, or about 22 to 30 inches, with a 12.5 to 15 inch tail, 15 centimeter tail, so 5 to 6 inches, with a shoulder height. Oh, this is a baby. Have a look at the adult here. The adults here will probably be about 20 to 30 centimeters or a foot tall in shoulder height, so about 8 to 12 inches, and they weigh about 5 to 8 kilograms, or limit to 18 pounds. And you can see they have like very short legs and ears compared to a lot of their relatives, and even the Maine wolf is very, very different looking than these guys, even though they're closely related. And these guys are actually adapted for carnivorous habits. The bush dog, they're actually one of 3 canids that include the dhole in the African wild dog that has the trenchant heel dentation, which is a single cusp on the carnassial tooth that increases the blade length, which is actually really cool. And females have 4 pair of teats, and they have both sexes will have large sense glands on each side of the anus, which allows them to actually scent and mark territories. And they actually have partially webbed toes that allow them to swim more efficiently. So these guys, as I mentioned, they're quite common. They can be found in Costa Rica, all through Central America, and even like parts of like Bolivia, Paraguay, and Brazil. So they're quite wide-ranging. And they typically found in forests, but they can be found in savannas and habitats near rivers, even open pastures as well, which is really interesting. And in terms of their diet, they're carnivores. They hunt during the day. They typically feed on pacas, agoutis, capybaras, large rodents like that. They'll also hunt alone. They can hunt alone, but they mostly hunt in small packs. They can actually bring down prey much larger than themselves, including peccaries and rare. And there's been a pack of 6 dogs even potentially like reported hunting a 250 kilogram or 550 pound tapir, which is very interesting. And they actually appear to be one of the most gregarious South American canids. So these guys will kind of use hollow logs or armadillo burrows as shelter, with the pack consisting of a single mated pair and their relations. And they have a home range of 3.8 to 10 kilometers, or 1.5 to 3.9 square miles. And only the adult pair will breed, and the other members will be subordinates, and they'll help with raising the dominant pair's pups. And the pack mates will keep in contact with wines and things like that. And when they eat larger prey, the parents will position themselves on either end of the animal to make sure the pups can disembowel it, which is pretty interesting. And in terms of reproduction, they will mate throughout the year. Let's have a look at the little babies as we talk about them. Look at these cute little guys. Estrus will last up to 12 days and occur every 15 to 44 days. And like many other canids, bush dogs will have a copulatory tie, which will keep the animals locked together as they mate. And they also will mark... urine marking will play a significant role in their behavior, so making sure that they're getting them fired up. Gestation typically lasts 65 to 83 days in these guys, and normally result in the birth of a litter of about 3 to 6 pups, but larger litters of up to 10 have been reported, and the young are born blind and helpless, and they initially weigh between 125 and 190 grams, or 4 to 6 ounces. And the eyes will open about 14 to 19 days after they're born, and the pups will first emerge from their dens for the first time thereafter. And the young are typically weaned at about 4 weeks of age, and they reach sexual maturity at about a year old, and they can live up to 10 years in captivity, so about the same as most dog breeds. So yeah, really, really cool little dog here. I'm a big fan of bush dogs. It's really cool that we get to talk about them. I'm a big fan of bush dogs, and I think they're very underrated. So yeah, a really nice mod done by Leaf. He did a wonderful job. And last, but most certainly not least, we have got a very, very cool animal here. We've got the Sloth Bear done by Leaf, Gaboy, and Genora Pizza for a remaster, and I think it came out wonderfully well. So we've got this wonderful guy here. So the Sloth Bear is Myrocopophagus, which is an ant-eating bear species. These guys are native to the Indian subcontinent, where they typically feed on fruits, ants, and termites. And yeah, they're also called the labiated bear because their long lower lip and palate is used for sucking up insects, which is really, really cool. And you can see they have this long, shaggy fur and a mane around the face with these long claws. And they're quite lankier than brown and Asian black bears, and they share the features of insectivorous mammals and evolved during the Pleistocene from an ancient brown bear through divergent evolution. So it's really, really cool. So there's a couple subspecies. There's the Indian sloth bear and the Sri Lankan sloth bear found in Sri Lanka. But I don't know how much you could really justify these subspecies because they're generally just smaller. It could be just a dwarf population or just this population that's shrunk a bit. But yeah, these guys reached their current form in the early Pleistocene, and they kind of look like that. And their characteristics, they're a medium-sized bear, so typically reach weights of between 55 and 105 kilograms, or 121 to 231 pounds. And typically female size. And for males, they get about 80 to 145 kilograms, or 760 to 320 pounds in typical size males. But exceptional size individuals can scale up to about 124 kilograms, 270 pounds, and up to in females, and 192 or 423 kilograms in males. And the average weight of the sloth bears in Nepal are about 95 kilograms for females and 114 for males, so between 209 to 251 pounds. And the dominant bears in India will average about 93 in males and 83 for females per one study. And the individuals in Sri Lanka are a little bit smaller, between 68.2 kilograms or 150 pounds to 104.5 or 230 pounds in males. Though their average is, they're really only 30% lighter, so that could be just because of the isolated population on Sri Lanka, which is a small island, of course. So you can see here they've got these long, thick muzzles here, and also long tongues that are adapted for feeding on insects and things like that. And these long lips and stuff like that. And actually, their premolars and molars are actually much smaller than other bears, and they do not chew much of vegetation. And it's kind of an adaptation to kind of eat these ants and things like that. They also have the longest tail of the bear family and grow between 15 and 18 centimeters long. And they're also completely black and even rusty in some specimens, save for like this around the face and a Y-shaped pattern or V-shaped pattern on the chest, which is absent in some specimens, particularly Sri Lankan ones. And the features also present with Asiatic black bears and sun bears, that they serve as a threat display. And all species live with tigers, though they can easily defend themselves against tigers. They're very aggressive. And you can see these guys are really famous for their like long coat that's very long and shaggy and unkempt. And it's particularly heavy around the neck, and they have a mane that's about 30 centimeters or 12 inches long. And the bear belly and underlegs are almost bare as well. And they typically are about the same size as an Asiatic black bear, but you can tell them apart because these guys have a raggier build, and they're also got bigger ears, a weirder face, and they're also just generally just different shape, which is pretty interesting. And these guys, they have a global range that includes India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka, where they typically occur in moist and dry tropical forests and savannas and grasslands, and are regionally extinct in Bangladesh. In terms of their breeding, in terms of their ecology, they may travel in pairs, but typically they're by themselves. And males have been often observed to be gentle with cubs, and they will potentially fight as well. They're capable of running quite fast, faster than most humans. And although they appear slow and clumsy, they're pretty good climbers. And they occasionally will climb to feed and rest, though they're not to escape enemies, as they prefer to stand their ground. And they are very, very powerful. Why do they sleep? Oh, probably eating. But yeah, they're quite aggressive. They'll even stand up to other bears. They'll stand up to tigers and be very, very aggressive. And they've got big claws that they use for tearing up termite mounds and things, so we don't want to get in front of those. So they will often mothers will actually carry their babies on their back where they hang on to the fur. And when they're threatened, the mother will pretty much just go run at them and charge at them, mock charge and roar. And even if they get too close, they'll scratch at them, stuff like that. And to mark their territories, they live on scraped trees and stuff like that. And they have all sorts of vocal sounds such as barks and squeals and trumpet-like calls that it can even huff when they want to be aggressive. So if there's like a tiger coming up, they'll huff at them and just try and scare them off. And we'll talk about reproduction. So we'll have a look at the cute little baby bear. So the breeding of these guys typically is in India about April, May, and June, and they give birth in December and early January. While in Sri Lanka, it's pretty much all year round since it's a little bit more tropical. The sows will gestate for about 210 days and typically give birth in caves or shelters under boulders. And the litters will typically consist of 1 to 2 cubs, sometimes even 3. And cubs are born blind and they open their eyes at about 4 weeks of age. Well, they'll slowly develop, and they develop quickly, and compared to most other bears. And they start walking at about a month after birth and become independent about 24 to 36 months. And they become sexually mature at about 3 years old. And young cubs will ride on the backs of their mothers while she walks, runs, or climbs trees until they reach about a third of her size, with individual riding positions maintained by the cubs through fighting. So they'll often just hold on even if the female's trying to fight someone. And intervals between litters can last between 2 to 3 years. So they're quite slow breeding in terms of bears. So they'll grow up fast, but they'll take longer breaks and things like that. Probably because they're a little bit more specialized. But in terms of their diet and stuff, they'll often eat termites and ants, which they locate by smell. They'll arrive at a mound and then they'll use their sharp claws to dig at it, and they have these long tongues they use to lick up all the termites and ants. But they also supplement their diet with fruits, carrion, and even other mammals. In May and April, they even feed on fallen petals of the moa tree, and they even eat mangoes, sugarcane, and even pods from the golden shower tree. Things like that. They're also quite fond of honey. And while they're feeding their cubs, these sows may actually regurgitate a mixture of that, honeycomb, jackfruit, wood apples, obviously to teach them as well. Um, but yeah, generally, for the most part, they'll feed on termites and that, but they will eat lots of other things. And in terms of relationships to other animals, they will actually will defend themselves, such as in front of animals such as elephants, rhinoceros, and tigers. They'll be quite aggressive to them. And Bengal tigers have been known to prey on sloth bears, but tigers will usually avoid them. But some have become habitual sloth bear killers. Tigers will typically hunt them while they're waiting for their mounds, but typically, mostly, since these guys are just so aggressive, these guys will just like roar and just try and their best to scare off the tiger and scratch them if they need to. But they sometimes often lose. But besides that, they don't have that many predators. Sometimes they'll be threatened to leopards can be a threat since they can follow them up trees. They've been known to chase leopards from their kills, though. Dhole packs may actually attack them as well, but they will typically try and prevent the bear from getting into caves and just trying to escape. Even one case, there was a golden jackal that was seen to aggressively displace an adult bear, which passively leapt away from the canid. So it's kind of weird as well. And they also live with, as I mentioned, Asiatic black bears, and even some places they'll live with sun bears as well. So there's places where all these three bear species will live. And the three species are not aggressive too much towards each other. And that's because they typically have different preferences and try to live in different habitats and eat different foods. But also, weirdly, Asian elephants do not really like these guys, as individual elephants will be known to chase away tigers and bears as well, which is very odd. And Indian rhinos will also be quite intolerant of these guys, which potentially be just to protect their babies, and it will chase them away. But in terms of their status and conservation, they're estimated to be, I believe, near threatened, vulnerable actually. The population is estimated to be less than 20,000 around in India in the wild. And they're listed, they're protected by the IUCN as well. Another big issue is that there's lots of conflict between these guys. And to address that as well, there's been talking about trying to help people deal with these bears because these bears can be aggressive, and often as well they live in places such as that reserves that protect species such as tigers and elephants, and these reserves can help conserve the bear. And also they will often come to people as they're scavenging, so that's another big thing. They'll enter towns and things, which can be dangerous. But in terms of relationship with humans, they're actually one of the more aggressive bears, and often due to large populations, they will become closer to people. So there's lots of issues of people getting attacked by sloth bears, and it's very, very aggressive. But in history, they've been kept as pets and also hunted and stuff like that, which has really hurt their populations generally. And there have been bans on practices for like having dancing bears. But even though there was a ban, there was many as 800 dancing bears on the street of India, which is pretty bad. But luckily that's going down now. And in terms of cultural references, this guy was Baloo in the Jungle Book, the sleepy old bear. And in a lot of other interpretations, such as the movies, he's been interpreted as like a brown bear or a black bear. But the reason he was kind of a sloth bear is because sloth bears are extremely aggressive. And in the book, he was much more like a aggressive colonel. So I think that would have translated well to a sloth bear, considering how aggressive they are, which is pretty cool. And yeah, there's lots of common names to them, like in Hindi and all of those languages, stuff like that. But yeah, a really, really cool remake. Again, this was done by Leif Gaboy and Genora Pizza. I'm really glad they redid this one because it really just looks like a sloth bear, and I'm a big fan of how this guy came out. So yeah, I think this will be a very, very great place to end the video. So yeah. Thanks for everyone that made these mods. Obviously credited you guys before, but yeah, really, really awesome mods. I'm a big fan. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye bye.